Emma stood in the parking lot of Naval Station Norfolk, her dress blues crisp against the humid Virginia air. The promotion ceremony had ended 20 minutes ago. Her phone screen glowed with 47 missed calls. All from Mom. She didn't even glance at the voicemail count. Her commanding officer was still shaking hands with families near the entrance, the sun catching the gold on his shoulders. Emma's own new rank insignia felt heavy on her collar. Real weight. Earned weight. They thought she'd come crawling back within a week. Thought boot camp would break her. Thought the military would chew her up and spit her out, and she'd return home begging for forgiveness, ready to slip back into the role of Sophie's shadow. They didn't realize Emma had been training for this escape her entire life. And they definitely didn't know that the scared 18-year-old who walked out of their house 3 years ago was never coming back, because that girl didn't exist anymore. The earliest memory Emma had of being erased happened when she was 7 years old. Their bedroom had always been Sophie's domain. Pastel pink walls, white furniture with gold handles, a canopy bed draped in sheer fabric that looked like something from a princess movie. Everything soft, everything bright, everything chosen by Sophie, approved by their mother, and presented to Emma as a shared decision she'd never been part of making. Emma didn't mind the pink, not really. She minded that when she asked for one wall to be painted blue, her mother had looked at her like she'd suggested burning the house down. She minded that the stuffed animals had to be arranged Sophie's way. She minded that the closet was organized by color, because Sophie said it looked better, even though Emma could never find anything. But what Emma remembered most was the dragon. She'd spent 3 days drawing it. Pencil first, then colored pencil she'd saved her allowance to buy. It wasn't good, she knew that even then, but it was hers. A European dragon with scales she'd carefully shaded green and gold, wings spread mid-flight, breathing fire across the page. She thought it looked brave, strong. Everything their pastel pink prison wasn't. She taped it to the wall above her bed, the only wall space that was technically hers. Sophie saw it when she came home from ballet practice. Her face had crumpled immediately. That practiced expression of wounded innocence she could summon faster than most people could blink. The tears came next. Then the wailing. Their mother rushed upstairs, already prepared to fix whatever had upset her precious Sophie. The conversation that followed wasn't really a conversation. Emma tried to explain that it was just a drawing, that it was on her side of the room, that Sophie had the entire rest of the house decorated exactly how she wanted. Her mother's face had gone cold in that particular way that meant the discussion was already over. The dragon was too dark, too violent, too scary for Sophie. Did Emma ever think about anyone but herself? Did she want her sister to have nightmares? The drawing came down. Emma was grounded for a week for being inconsiderate. Sophie watched from the doorway, tears already dry. A small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That was the first time Emma understood the rules of their relationship. Sophie wanted, Sophie got, and Emma's role was to want nothing that might interfere with that. But what Sophie and their parents didn't know yet was that Emma was learning, observing, taking notes on exactly how the game was played, because one day she'd stop playing altogether. Elementary school was a masterclass in disappearance. Every morning, their mother dressed them in identical outfits, sometimes the exact same dress in the same color, sometimes complementary outfits that were clearly meant to be seen as a matching set. Emma and Sophie, Sophie and Emma, the twins, never just Emma. Their mother thought it was adorable. She'd take pictures every morning. Deet posting them on Facebook with captions about her beautiful twin girls and heart emojis. Friends and relatives would comment about how cute they looked, how special it must be to have twins, how lucky they were. Emma felt like a doll being dressed for someone else's amusement. She tried once to wear different jeans than the ones laid out for her. Her mother had noticed immediately, her voice sharp as she demanded Emma go upstairs and change. Sophie had been wearing light wash jeans with embroidered flowers. Emma needed to wear the same pair. When Emma pointed out that they were in 4th grade and maybe didn't need to match anymore, her father's voice had boomed from the kitchen. He told her she was being selfish, that she only thought about herself, that Sophie liked matching, so what was Emma's problem? Was she trying to make Sophie feel bad? The implication was clear. Sophie's feelings mattered. Emma's didn't. Emma changed into the matching jeans. She learned to check what Sophie was wearing before getting dressed. She learned to agree when her mother held up identical dresses. She learned to smile for the photos. But she also learned to hate the camera. 5th grade brought ballet. Sophie had been obsessed with it for months. She'd watched videos online, twirled around the house in her socks, begged their mother for lessons. Emma had no interest in ballet. She'd mentioned boxing once, just once, after seeing a video of a women's match where the fighters moved with a kind of controlled power that made something in Emma's chest feel alive. Her father's reaction had been immediate and explosive. His voice filled the kitchen as he demanded to know why Emma always had to make everything difficult. Why couldn't she just do what Sophie wanted? Boxing was too rough, too aggressive, too masculine. What was wrong with ballet? Most girls would kill for ballet lessons. Emma tried to explain that she wasn't asking instead of Sophie. She was asking for herself, separately. Her mother had cut her off, her voice sugary sweet with condescension, as she explained that boxing was too rough for Sophie. That if Emma did boxing, Sophie would feel left out. That they did things together, as sisters, as twins. The unspoken message. Emma's interests only mattered if Sophie shared them. 2 weeks later, they were both enrolled in ballet. Sophie glowed during every class, soaking up the instructor's attention, perfecting her pliés and pirouettes. When Emma went through the motions, her body moving correctly, but her mind somewhere else entirely. Somewhere with punching bags and sweat, and the kind of exhaustion you earned instead of endured. But what their parents didn't realize was that ballet was teaching Emma discipline, balance, how to control her body and her face, how to perform the role expected of her while keeping her true thoughts locked away, skills that would serve her well when she finally made her escape. Middle school marked the beginning of the friend problem. Emma had finally found people she clicked with. Girls who liked the same books, who laughed at the same jokes, who didn't care about being perfect. She'd been careful about it, building friendships during lunch and in classes Sophie wasn't in. For the first time, she had something that was just hers, but it lasted exactly 3 weeks. Sophie noticed Emma laughing with her new friends in the hallway. By the end of the day, Sophie had inserted herself into the group. She laughed louder, talked more, made herself the center of attention with practiced ease. Emma's friends responded the way everyone always responded to Sophie, drawn in by her energy, her charm, her ability to make everything about her feel important. Within a month, they weren't Emma's friends anymore. They were Sophie's friends. And Emma was just the quiet twin who came along because they were a package deal. Emma tried to push back once. She made plans with one friend, just the two of them, to see a movie Sophie had said she didn't want to see. When she mentioned it at dinner, Sophie's face had shifted through confusion, hurt, and anger in rapid succession. The tears started before Emma could finish explaining. Their mother's voice had been sharp as broken glass. How could Emma purposely exclude her sister? What kind of person did that? Sophie just wanted to be included, to be close to her twin. And Emma was deliberately shutting her out. Over a movie. The plans were canceled. Emma, Sophie, and the friend went to see the movie Sophie originally didn't want to see. Sophie spent the entire time talking. Emma sat in silence watching the screen, feeling something inside her crystallize into cold, patient anger. High school was when Emma started counting down. 4 years until 18. 4 years until legal adulthood. 4 years until she could make decisions that her parents couldn't override. Sophie had found a new weapon by freshman year. Boys. Specifically, any boy Emma showed interest in. It happened with such predictable precision that Emma eventually stopped mentioning crushes altogether. but Sophie had a radar for it. She could sense when Emma looked at someone a certain way, when Emma's voice changed talking to someone. And then Sophie would strike. The boy would be dating Sophie within days, sometimes within hours. Sophie would parade him around, her arm linked through his, making sure Emma saw, making sure Emma knew. Their mother would gush about how cute Sophie and whatever his name was looked together. Their father would grunt approvingly about Sophie knowing how to get what she wanted, and Emma would add another tally mark to her mental countdown. 3 years, 2 years, 18 months. But what none of them realized was that every boy Sophie stole, every friend she absorbed, every piece of Emma's identity she claimed as territory, it was all making Emma stronger, harder, more resolved. Because Emma was learning the most important lesson of all. She couldn't change them. She could only leave them. Senior year arrived with a decision Emma had never been consulted about. Sophie announced at dinner one night, her voice bright with artificial excitement, that she decided they were both going to beauty school. Cosmetology. They'd do it together, get their licenses together, maybe even open a salon together someday. It would be perfect. Their mother had clapped her hands together, already gushing about how wonderful it would be, how proud she was of Sophie for planning their future. Their father had nodded, already mentally moving on to whatever game was on TV that night. Emma sat frozen, her fork halfway to her mouth. She hadn't chosen cosmetology. She hadn't even been asked about cosmetology. Sophie had decided, and therefore it was decided for both of them. College applications would go to the same schools. They'd submit portfolios together. They'd share an apartment near whatever program they chose. Emma's future had been planned without her. Again. She'd excused herself from the table, went to her room, Sophie's room really, it had never been hers, and pulled out her laptop. She'd been researching for months already, but that night she made it official. She filled out the preliminary contact form. Name, age, education level, areas of interest. The Navy recruiter called her back within 3 days. Emma took the call in the school library during lunch, her voice low, her answers careful. She asked about enlistment age, about parental consent requirements, about when she could leave for basic training after turning 18. The recruiter's voice had been professional, almost bored, as he explained that at 18 she could sign her own papers. No parental permission needed. She could leave as soon as a slot opened up after her birthday. Emma hung up and sat in the library for another 20 minutes, staring at nothing, feeling something like hope burn in her chest for the first time in years. The final months before Emma's 18th birthday crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sophie had already picked out their apartment. She'd shown Emma pictures, another bright pastel space with white furniture and gold accents, just like their childhood bedroom. Emma would never escape it. Their mother had already put down a deposit, signed a lease with both their names. Emma's signature forged with permission she'd never given. The cosmetology school applications had been submitted. Again, both their names. Again, without Emma's input. Sophie had even chosen their class schedules, and making sure they had every single class together. Wouldn't want to be apart, she'd said, smiling that smile that made Emma's skin crawl. But what Sophie didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Emma had been waking up at 5 a.m. for the past 6 months, running, doing push-ups, preparing her body for boot camp. She'd been saving every dollar from her part-time job, hiding cash in a book she had hollowed out specifically for this purpose. She'd been to the recruitment office 4 more times, filled out paperwork, taken practice tests, chosen her rate, operations specialist, navigation systems, something technical, something that would take her far away from here. Her ship date was set for 1 week after her 18th birthday. Sophie and their parents had no idea. They were planning Emma's future. Emma was planning her disappearance. And in exactly 43 days, she would be gone. Emma's 18th birthday was on a Saturday. The apartment showing was the Sunday before. Their mother had insisted they all go together, Sophie had been talking about nothing else for weeks. The layout, the furniture she had already ordered, the color scheme she'd chosen for their shared bedroom. Yes, shared. Even in their own apartment, Emma wouldn't get her own space. Sophie had explained with that saccharine patience she used when pretending to be reasonable that it would be wasteful to pay for a two-bedroom when they could save money sharing. Plus, it would be just like home, just like it had always been. Emma had agreed to go to the showing because refusing would have raised questions she couldn't afford to answer. Not yet. Not with 6 days left. The apartment was exactly what Emma had expected. White walls, gold fixtures, a living room that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never actually lived anywhere. The bedroom Sophie had chosen for them had 2 beds separated by a nightstand, pastel pink comforter on one, lavender on the other, Sophie's concession to giving Emma her own style. Their mother had walked through the space with her phone out, already taking pictures for Facebook, already planning the posts about her girls starting their adult lives together. Their father had grunted approval at the rent price, the security features, the proximity to the cosmetology school. Sophie had twirled in the empty living room, her voice bright as she described where the couch would go, where they'd put the TV, how she'd already picked out curtains. She'd grabbed Emma's hand, her grip tight, her smile wide, her eyes holding that familiar warning. Agree with me, or else. Emma had smiled, nodded, said all the right things, and felt the last thread of hesitation snap inside her chest. Because standing in that apartment, watching Sophie direct their mother on photo angles, listening to her father talk about co-signing the lease, Emma finally understood with perfect clarity. This would never end. Not after beauty school. Not after they got jobs. Not after years had passed. Sophie would keep her locked in this role forever, and their parents would help her do it, unless Emma burned it all down. The paperwork arrived on Tuesday. Emma found the envelope on her bed when she came home from school. Official documents from the cosmetology program, enrollment forms, financial aid applications, housing agreements. Her name was already filled in on half of them. Sophie's handwriting, mimicking Emma's signature with practiced ease. Their mother must have helped. Some of the forms required parental signatures too, and those were already complete. They'd been planning this for months, signing Emma up for a future she'd never agreed to, forging her name on legal documents, committing her to loans she hadn't applied for. And they'd done it so casually, so automatically, that they probably didn't even realize it was wrong. Emma sat on her bed, the bed that had never really been hers, and looked at the papers spread across her lap. Her hands weren't shaking, her heart wasn't racing. She felt calm, eerily calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm. Sophie came into the room without knocking. She never knocked. The concept of Emma deserving privacy had never occurred to her. She had asked if Emma had seen the papers, her voice sing-song and cheerful. She'd already filled out most of them to make it easier. Wasn't that nice of her? All Emma had to do was sign. They could submit everything by Friday, get it all done before Emma's birthday weekend. Their mother was planning a party. 18 was a big deal. Sophie had already picked out matching dresses for them to wear. Emma had looked up at her sister, really looked at her, saw the absolute certainty in Sophie's face that Emma would comply, that Emma would sign, that Emma would show up to the party in whatever dress Sophie had chosen, that Emma would move into the apartment and attend the school and live the life Sophie had designed without ever once asking what Emma actually wanted. But what Sophie didn't see, what she'd never been capable of seeing, was that Emma had stopped being afraid of her. Emma had smiled and told Sophie she'd look at the papers later. Sophie had bounced out of the room, already moving on to the next thing, confident in her control. Emma had taken the enrollment forms, the housing agreements, the financial aid applications, all with her forged signature, and locked them in the hollowed-out book with her cash. Evidence. Not that she'd need it, but having it felt good anyway. 3 more days. Emma's 18th birthday fell on a Saturday, just as she'd planned. Her parents took them out to dinner. Sophie had chosen the restaurant, of course. Had chosen Emma's outfit, too, laying it out on Emma's bed that morning with a note about how good they'd look in their matching dresses. Emma had worn it. It played the role one last time. At dinner, Sophie had talked endlessly about the apartment, about school starting in the fall, about the salon they'd open together someday. Their mother had beamed, adding her own thoughts, already designing the salon in her mind. Their father had been on his phone for most of it, but had looked up long enough to tell Emma she was lucky to have a sister who cared so much about their future. Emma had cut into her steak and thought about the bus ticket in her purse. Departure, tomorrow, 6:47 a.m. Destination, Chicago, then a connecting bus to Great Lakes Naval Station. Her recruiter had confirmed everything. She'd be sworn in Monday morning. Boot camp started Tuesday. They'd given her a birthday cake, sung to her. Their mother had posted pictures online with a caption about her baby girls turning 18. Sophie had made a speech about how excited she was for everything they were going to do together. Emma had blown out the candles and made a wish she didn't need to make because it was already coming true. That night, back home, Emma had packed a single duffel bag. She didn't take much: some clothes, documents, the cash from the hollowed book, her laptop. Everything else, the pink bedroom, the matching clothes, the life they'd built around her without her permission, she was leaving behind. She'd set her alarm for 5:30 a.m., early enough to be gone before anyone woke up, but she decided something else too. She wasn't going to just disappear. She was going to tell them, face to face, let them know exactly what they'd done, let them know exactly what they'd lost. She owed them that much honesty, even if they'd never given it to her. Sunday dinner was a sacred tradition in their house. The whole family at the table, no phones, no TV, just conversation. Emma had asked that morning if they could have dinner early. She had something important to tell them, something about her future. Their mother had lit up immediately, already assuming Emma wanted to talk about the apartment or the school. Sophie had smirked, probably thinking Emma was finally going to show some enthusiasm for their shared plans. They'd gathered at the table at 5 p.m. pot roast, mashed potatoes, the same meal their mother made every Sunday. Emma had barely touched her food. When the plates were mostly empty, Emma had taken a breath and begun. She'd kept her voice steady as she explained that she wasn't going to cosmetology school, that she wouldn't be moving into the apartment, that she'd made other plans, plans that were hers alone. The table had gone silent. Her father's fork had stopped halfway to his mouth. Her mother's face had shifted from confusion to concern. Sophie had simply stared, not quite processing what she was hearing. Emma had continued. She was joining the Navy. She'd already enlisted. She was leaving tomorrow morning. Everything was arranged. This wasn't a discussion. It was an announcement. The explosion had been immediate. Sophie's scream had cut through the air like a siren, shrill and furious and utterly unhinged. She'd lunged across the table, her face contorted with rage, demanding to know what Emma thought she was doing. How could she be so selfish? What about their plans? What about the apartment? What about beauty school? What about Sophie? Always what about Sophie? Their mother's voice had layered over Sophie's, high-pitched and panicked, talking about the deposits they'd paid, the papers they'd signed, the plans they'd made. How could Emma do this to them? How could she be so ungrateful after everything they'd done for her? Their father had simply roared. His fist had slammed on the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. He'd called Emma selfish, thoughtless, a traitor to her family. The military. What kind of girl joined the military? What was wrong with her? Emma had sat through it all, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm. She'd let them scream themselves hoarse, let them say everything they needed to say, let them reveal exactly who they were when they couldn't control her anymore. When the yelling had finally died down to bitter silence, Emma had stood up. She'd looked at each of them in turn. Her father, red-faced and furious. Her mother, tears streaming down her face, already playing the victim. And Sophie. Sweet, manipulative, parasitic Sophie, staring at her with a mixture of shock and hatred that was almost beautiful in its purity. Emma had spoken quietly, but every word had landed like a hammer. I don't have a twin sister. I have a leech who's been feeding off me my entire life. And you, she'd looked at her parents, you let it happen. You enabled it. You sacrificed one daughter to keep the other one happy. So here's what's going to happen. I'm leaving tomorrow. You won't know where I am. You won't be able to contact me unless I allow it. And Sophie, you're going to have to figure out who you are without me. Good luck with that. She'd turned to leave. Now, Sophie had screamed after her, her voice cracking with genuine panic now, begging Emma to stop, to think about this, to remember they were sisters, they were twins, they were supposed to do everything together. Emma had paused at the doorway and delivered the final blow. We were never twins. We were just two people who happened to be born on the same day, and I'm done pretending that means you own me. She'd walked upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and waited. They'd pounded on it, demanded she come out, threatened to call the police. Emma had reminded them through the door that she was 18, a legal adult, and if they called the police, she'd show them the forged signatures on the enrollment papers, ask them if that was legal. The pounding had stopped. Emma had lain in bed that last night, listening to Sophie sob in the hallway, listening to her parents argue in hushed, angry voices downstairs. She'd felt nothing. No guilt, no second thoughts, just relief. At 5:30 a.m., she'd climbed out the window with her duffel bag and walked to the bus station. By the time her family woke up, Emma was 3 states away. The first month, they'd called constantly, dozens of calls a day, voicemails from her mother crying and begging, texts from Sophie alternating between apologetic and accusatory. Even her father had called once, his voice gruff as he demanded she stop being ridiculous and come home. Emma had blocked them all after week 2. But what Emma didn't know, what she wouldn't find out until much later, was how quickly everything had collapsed without her. Sophie had tried to start beauty school alone, had shown up the first day, and realized she didn't actually know how to do anything without Emma there to copy from, to lean on, to use as an emotional crutch. She had lasted 3 weeks before dropping out, citing mental health reasons that were really just an inability to function independently. The apartment lease had been broken, the deposits lost. Sophie had moved back home, back into the pink bedroom, back into the life of a teenager, except she was 18 now and had no plans. No goals, no identity beyond Emma's twin. Her friends, the ones she'd stolen from Emma, had drifted away quickly once they realized Sophie had nothing to offer without Emma around. Sophie had never learned how to maintain relationships. She'd only learned how to infiltrate Emma's. Their mother had spent months in denial, convinced Emma would come back. That boot camp would be too hard. That Emma would realize she'd made a mistake. She'd kept Emma's side of the bedroom exactly as it was, waiting. Their father had simply been angry at Emma for leaving, angry at Sophie for falling apart, angry at his wife for coddling their daughters, angry at himself, though he'd never admit it, for not seeing this coming. But none of them understood yet. They thought this was temporary, a phase, rebellion. They didn't realize Emma was never coming back. 2 years passed before they saw Emma again. She'd made petty officer 3rd class by then, operations specialist, top of her rate. Her commanding officer had written her a letter of commendation. She was stationed at Naval Station Norfolk, working in the Combat Information Center, and tracking ships and aircraft with a precision that had earned her the nickname Eagle Eye among her unit. She'd cut her hair short, military regulation, but it suited her. She'd built muscle, stood differently, spoke differently. The scared teenager who'd left home had been replaced by someone harder, sharper, unrecognizable. Family day at the base was open to relatives. Emma hadn't invited hers, but her mother had found out anyway. Probably called the base pretending to be Emma, got the information from some admin who didn't know better. They'd shown up. All three of them. Emma had been in the parking lot, heading to her car after her shift when she'd seen them. Her mother had aged, new lines around her eyes, gray in her hair she hadn't bothered to dye. Her father looked smaller somehow, less imposing. And Sophie. Sophie looked exactly the same. Same clothes, same hair, same expression of wounded innocence she'd been wearing since childhood. Except now there was something else underneath it. Desperation. They'd approached carefully, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. Her mother had started crying immediately, arms outstretched, talking about how much they'd missed her, how proud they were, how they'd been wrong. Could Emma forgive them? Could she come home for a visit? Sophie had hung back, her voice small as she'd whispered Emma's name. She'd looked brittle, fragile in a way that was real this time, not performed. She'd tried to explain that she'd been in therapy, that she understood now what she'd done, that she needed Emma. Please. Emma had let them finish, had stood there in her uniform, arms crossed, face impassive. Then she'd checked her watch and delivered the truth they'd spent 2 years trying to avoid. I don't have a family. I have a unit. I have brothers and sisters in arms. I have a chain of command. I have a purpose. You three? You're strangers who share some DNA, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave this base before I have to call security. Her mother had broken down completely. Her father had tried anger one more time, his voice rising as he demanded respect. Emma had simply pulled out her phone and called the master at arms, told them there were unauthorized visitors harassing personnel in parking lot C. She'd gotten in her car while they were still standing there, stunned. She'd driven away without looking in the rearview mirror. They never came back. 5 years later, Emma made chief petty officer, one of the youngest in her rate. She was stationed overseas by then. Okinawa, Japan. About as far from home as she could get without leaving the planet. She'd gotten engaged to a fellow sailor, a submariner she'd met during a joint training exercise. His name was Marcus. He was from Oregon. Had never heard of Sophie. Didn't care that Emma was a twin. Loved her for exactly who she was, not who she was supposed to be. They were planning a small wedding. Just their military friends. No family invited. Emma had listed Marcus's parents as her emergency contacts, had put them down as next of kin. They'd treated her like a daughter from day one, and that meant more than genetics ever had. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Sophie still lived at home, still slept in the pink bedroom. She'd bounced between part-time jobs, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. She was 23 years old and had never lived alone, never paid her own bills, never made a decision without her mother's input. She'd tried therapy for a while, but it hadn't helped much. How could it? The therapist had tried to get her to build her own identity, but Sophie didn't know how. She'd spent her entire life being Emma's shadow. Now, she was just a shadow with no one to follow. She still blamed Emma, told anyone who'd listened that her twin had abandoned her, betrayed her, ruined her life. Their mother agreed. Spent hours on Facebook in support groups for parents whose children went no contact, painting herself as the victim of Emma's cruelty. Their father had mostly checked out. Spent his time at work or in front of the TV, easier than acknowledging what he'd done, what they had all done. But Emma didn't know any of this, and didn't care to know. She'd blocked them so thoroughly that their lives simply didn't exist in her world anymore. She'd built something new, something they could never touch, because the truth they'd learned too late, the truth Sophie would never accept, was this. Emma had never needed them. She just needed to get away from them. And now, standing on a beach in Okinawa, watching the sunset over the Pacific, wearing the anchors of a chief petty officer, and planning a wedding to a man who loved her for herself, Emma had finally found what she'd been looking for her entire life: freedom. Emma's story isn't just about one woman who escaped. It's about every person who's ever been told their dreams don't matter, Every child forced to shrink themselves to make someone else comfortable. Every soul who's been gasping for air in a life designed by people who never asked what they wanted. If you made it to the end of this story, you felt something. Maybe you saw yourself in that pink bedroom. Maybe you recognized Sophie in someone from your own life. Maybe you've been counting down your own days until freedom. Or maybe you're already standing on your own beach, watching your own sunset, and you just needed to be reminded that you made the right choice. These stories matter. Not because they're easy to hear, but because they're real. Because somewhere right now, there's another Emma sitting in a library, researching her escape. And she needs to know she's not alone. She needs to know that freedom is possible. That the people who tried to erase you don't get the final word. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, or angry or hopeful, hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For the next Emma who needs to hear that she deserves to exist on her own terms. And if you know someone who needs this reminder, share it. Because stories like this, they save lives. You're not selfish for wanting your own life. You're not a traitor for choosing yourself. You're free.